Welcome to Full Speed Ahead. I'm Craig Fuller, right from Freight Alley. Got a special guest today, Matt Silver from Forager, the founder of Forager Logistics. Matt, what is Forager?
Forager is a cross-border and drayage-focused platform that's building technology to try to automate as much as possible within that entire supply chain ecosystem.
Now, you're a freight broker at the end of the day?
I like to say that we're a technology company that happens to be phenomenal at moving freight.
Okay, so I mean a lot of conversation about the digital freight marketplaces, the DFMs, which has gotten a lot of interest. But you are a second generation founder. Your father has been described as the godfather of the Chicago freight mafia. Do you agree with that, or is that fair?
Yeah, he's hands down the most influential person in this industry.
Got it. Now you and I have that in common because I'm a I think I'm third generation now in trucking. I think my great grandfather had a farm and he had trucks, but I don't know if that counts. But I'm wondering, growing up with in a family involved in these high growth, your father went out and has been involved in a number of freight startups, American Backhaulers, then went on to start Coyote. Your mother was also involved in that. I'm wondering, how do you think about the legacy of your family and what that means for you now moving in to start your own business?
So when I was growing up, a lot of people would ask me what my parents did for a living, and I said it was something with trucks. I had no idea what it was. I know that I played with toy trucks as a little kid, and like the actual trucks from a carrier that they would give you on a visit or whatever. But at the end of the day, I'm very proud to be part of the industry and be trying to make kind of our own way within the industry, trying to do something a little bit different. But at the same time, there's not somebody that I learned more from than my parents in terms of how to grow a successful business, how to scale it, how to create the right culture. Like everything we learned from Marianne about the cultural aspects of what they did in the last company, and just in general being able to take from everything I've learned from my family, and even I've learned from Andrew. Right. So it's definitely been impactful to be part of the family and to be able to use that to build our business. But at the end of the day, it's awesome being a Silver, but it's also has its challenges also.
As a Fuller, I can empathize with the challenges of being in a family of entrepreneurs and going out and doing something on your own. In some ways, you're doing things different, and you may not get as much credit as if you just had a blank slate. I'm wondering, so you think about Forager, what possessed you or inspired you to start Forager?
So when I left Coyote, my thought was to go work for a technology company that was kind of in the logistics space, but not directly involved in it. And I went through the interview process there, and the entire time I kept talking about logistics. And the guy said, "We're in the industry, but we don't move freight. Are you sure you want to come here, or do you want to stay in freight?" And when that process kind of worked its way out, I realized that I did not want to go in.
And this was not in Forager. This was another
after I left, but before starting Forager. So I spent the next few months kind of thinking about what I wanted to do. I focused on photography a good amount of the time while I was waiting, and ultimately I considered going to another company, helping them scale out their US and their Mexico business, Canadian company. But at the end of the day, I realized, one, they weren't going to buy into the model that I felt was the right model to scale a logistics company, which is the division of labor model more than the cradle to grave. I realized that trying to convince them to change to what I wanted to do didn't make sense, combined with a conversation I had with Ted actually about
Ted Ailing here.
Yeah, Ted Ailing. Yeah, so he was the one that kind of gave me the final kick to go start my own business, and ultimately
he'll do that. He did that to me.
Yeah,
so
he's been. I haven't known him as long as you would think based on the acquisition from before, but the time that I have spent getting to know him, it's been really interesting. He's very motivational in that sense. So at the end of the day, I realized that my passion was specifically with cross-border freight. Of all the things I did in my career, I was a carrier rep, I did operations, I spent a year in our private fleet department. Building out the Mexico department there was definitely the thing that I enjoyed the most, and an area in which I think there's a lot of opportunity for disruption going forward.
Is it the intersection of dealing with different laws, the logistics of moving between carrier to carrier, between countries? Why is this interesting? It seems like an interesting differentiation for Forager versus the other marketplaces that sort of popped up. And it seems like a part of the industry that is frankly underserved.
Yeah, so there's tons of DFMs right now that are doing the app-based, get all the owner-operators on the app, and they're basically, at the end of the day, those companies I don't think are any different than the legacy logistics companies other than better marketing, essentially. And so where we're focused on cross-border, with Mexico specifically, there's anywhere between 5 and 8 different parties involved in a single shipment. You've got the U.S. and the Mexican trucking company, you've got the border transfer guy, you've got a warehouse potentially where you're going to cross-dock it, U.S. Mexico customs broker, plus the shipper and the receiver on top of it, and 2 different languages. Putting all of that stuff together, like, that takes a whole village to move a load cross-border. And so we're trying to automate that whole process of being able to get a rate instantly, being able to book that load or have that load auto-tender to the right carrier. That was an area that I thought we could actually fix. When you look at the U.S. market and the amount of brokers that are in the market, that didn't seem fun to me. Cross-border to me is a lot more fun. Drayage is a lot more fun. I've heard a ton about the challenges that go into, I had talked to a very large beverage distributor a few weeks ago that said, hands down, their biggest black hole that they deal with right now is in drayage. Yeah. They know where the container is the entire time it's on the ocean. It's as soon as it hits the port, they have no idea where it is. They don't know if demurrage charges are going to start to accrue. We want to solve those problems that people actually have, rather than just trying to repurpose the existing capacity that another big broker might have.
So trade's getting a ton of attention over the last couple of years. Trump's in the office, talking a lot about trade and trade policy. But a lot of the attention is on China and the Asian sphere, but really our largest trading partners are Canada and Mexico. And that's really your focus. That's where you guys are really focused on helping streamline that process. How do you think that differentiates you versus some of the other DFMs that have popped up at some of the port cities?
So I've gotten questions like that from potential investors. And the biggest driving factor that I think makes us stand out, one of the bigger factors is our background collectively as a leadership team. So I spent 12 years at Coyote. Jesse was there for 6. We have several other leaders within the company that were either at Amazon or Uber or somebody that worked at Apple. Even at an Apple store, I think you really get a lot of core development to being a leader in a company. But at the end of the day, we have the logistics DNA, I guess literally and figuratively.
Tribal knowledge. We call
tribal knowledge.
We call it tribal knowledge here at FreightWaves.
Yes, that's a familiar term for me too. So tribal knowledge, I think, is something that you can't replace. We're not a tech. I'm not a tech guy. I didn't go work at some other tech company out in the valley or in Seattle thinking, oh, those freight people don't know what they're talking about. I'll fix it.
Right.
We've lived it and breathed it. We understand how it works. I try to put myself in my customer's shoes and understand what they need for what we can build for. But at the end of the day, the cross-border piece, because of my obsession with it, is why I think we're going to be great at it and why we're going to succeed.
Yeah, I mean, there's been a lot of U.S. companies. So the history, if you sort of follow the last 20 years, NAFTA was 94, I think, when NAFTA was enacted. The promise of Mexican, and I was 15. I was going in high school, and I remember, and I went to school in I went to university in Texas, and obviously NAFTA was a huge deal in Waco, Texas, because of the impact of the Texas economy. But the promise of the Mexican trucking industry coming into the United States never happened. Celadon was big in that market. I still think is quite large. Yeah. CFI was a real big north-south carrier and still a dominant player. I'm curious, they both made significant investments, but we never did see the Mexican carriers really come into the U.S. market.
So do you know what B1 drivers are?
I don't as well as you probably.
Okay, so I'll explain it. So a B1 driver is typically a Mexican driver. It's similar to Canadian drivers. So there are trucking companies that have permits to go into the United States from Mexico, but typically, I don't know if CFI has, I don't think CFI has B1 drivers, but most carriers that are based in Laredo or El Paso have B1 drivers. So they're Mexican national. They will haul the load from Nuevo Laredo or Juarez going somewhere into the U.S. Once they deliver that load, they have to take a load back to the
because of cabotage rules, right?
Yes. Yeah. So it's the same exact thing with Canada.
And they can only go, 5 hours? Can they go in the full? At one point, and this may have changed, but at one point they could only go 5 hours into into Texas, which got them as far as Dallas, and they had to turn back around.
Oh no, there's B1 drivers that we work with that go from Laredo to Toronto.
Okay, got it.
So they'll take loads, inbound from Mexico to Canada. They'll take a load. If they do that, they can go from Canada back to the U.S. and then U.S. to Mexico. But there's no limit other than the fact that they cannot do a domestic shipment.
They can't go point to point.
Yeah, because
how
of
big is
cabotage.
that market?
For the total cross-border trucking market, we're looking at probably $20 billion between Mexico and Canada.
But how much of that traffic is done on B1 drivers?
I'm not positive. I know that it's increasing. You hear about driver shortage in the U.S. Well, the easiest way to solve for that is finding people in another country.
Do you believe in a driver shortage?
I think it's a lot of talk, but I don't know that. Obviously, drivers are starting to retire, but there are new people that are going into trucking, and
we've talked a lot
yeah.
about whether you could truly say there's a driver shortage. I think a lot of it's semantics and how you describe it. I think trucking companies can have driver shortage, which means a truck sitting against a fence, which is an unproductive asset. But I look at it, there's capacity shortages and then driver shortages. Driver shortages in my mind are company-specific lack of drivers. Yes. And then capacity shortages are the market at times has fluctuations between supply and demand. And that's what causes capacity shortages.
But that's only in certain markets. It's like everything's moving at the end of the day. So there's trucks.
Exactly. Like there's
it's just not
still,
the price that they want.
Where I can still get bananas and orange juice and Coca-Cola at my grocery store. Can still order my goods from Amazon. They're going to show up when I've ordered them. So that's an argument. I think it's a semantic. We get lost in the semantics, and has become a very polarizing concept for the driver population. When we post it out, if we post an article with the word driver shortage in there, and I suspect that drivers will watch this and they'll be commenting about this, which will be fun, but you're not the one talking about it, I am. As you think about...
we appreciate the drivers significantly.
Well, you have to. I think oftentimes, and this actually is happening when I go out and you visit a lot of venture capitalists, but you're also grounded with a lot of experience in the industry, so you understand a lot about the industry that in many ways I think gives you a unfair advantage over a lot of the venture-backed upstarts, because and you've seen it. You've seen startups scale to very successful enterprises. At the end of the day, we're only as good as the drivers hauling the freight. Like, there's no amount of digitization in today's freight market that can replace the guy that ends up taking the load. And I think oftentimes as an industry we forget that.
So the biggest thing I learned from my brother actually was when Andrew used to work with a lot of owner-operators, and he knew when that guy's kid had baseball, like Monday, Wednesday, Friday, and he made sure that he was probably running in the Southeast, he was running local beverages, let's call it, and he knew that guy had to be home every Monday, Wednesday, Friday, so he'd put him on a short run to get back in time. And that was something that I've taken with me, and I spent a lot of time working with owner-operators also in my past roles, and I wanted to make sure that I understood what made that guy tick. Why did he like to be in a truck? And I had a driver that told me he just wanted to see the entire country. And so he drove. I had different people that had different reasons for why they were truck drivers and why they like to drive and why they like to stay local or go far. I had one guy that ran from the Bay Area to LA to Phoenix, back to the Bay Area. I just ran him in a little triangle every week so that he could be home with his daughter over the weekend. Yeah. So valuing drivers, without drivers, we don't have a business.
You don't have a business, and your entire service model depends on how well that driver responds to whatever incentives you align for them, whether it's payment, just treating him with respect, him or her with respect, or vice versa. All of that
calling
really
them
matters.
100 times.
Yeah, not calling or texting them for alerts.
Not trying to make them download 5 more apps.
Yeah, exactly. So I'm wondering, how do you think about Forager as a company? You guys do have a differentiated story, which I'm a real big fan of what you're doing around the cross-border. I also have been always enamored with the movement of freight. My dream when I was younger was to work inside U.S. Express to set up the international business. Unfortunately, it was done before I got out of college because they sort of endorsed the NAFTA thing and bought a Mexican carrier, which they've now exited. But that was my dream, and I'm always the intersection point between the logistics of what happens in Laredo and New Laredo. There's a lot of stuff that takes place, a lot of risk, financial risk, and currencies are moving between those countries.
Plus the risk
cargo theft. all of that. Are you guys helping shippers address those issues?
Yeah. So one of the first projects I ever tackled when starting the Mexico business originally at Coyote was trying to get tequila out of Mexico up to Chicago for a very well-known rapper. Not like directly for him, but it was his tequila brand. And the first thing that they asked for was escorts. And so, of course, the first conversation was around, like, what type of security are you looking for? Was it just a driver in the front, driver in the back? And it wound up going down the conversation of, like, are we finding armed escorts to haul, like, to secure this freight and get it to the border? Fast forward now, 4 or 5 years from now, or from then, and we're moving tires out of Mexico. We're moving other types of tequila. We move TVs and appliances. All of those types of commodities have different security requirements around it. Same thing in the U.S. where you can't, stop for 200 miles when you leave a certain electronics facility in Texas. Like, they have all sorts of requirements in place. We'll help set all of that up for the customer, and then on top of it, we have insurance for all the freight in Mexico, which most people don't have. So we're adding that separate layer on top of the security piece to insure it, even if there is an issue.
Now, you guys have raised venture capital from institutions. Chicago Ventures is an investor, and Chicago Ventures actually has a track record of investing in a lot of freight startups because, frankly, Chicago is a major freight center in terms of innovation, as well as just a very important market. But you also raised from strategics. Transforce was one of those investors. What motivated them to get behind your business?
So TFI, I first met a few years ago, and one of my questions was actually why they operate everything completely separate. And I felt like I almost got into an argument with them about it, about operating all these entities separately instead of putting them all together and being like kind of one TFI international company. But I understand why they do it. They're a multi-billion-dollar publicly traded company, so they've certainly got a key piece of the market. But from a technology standpoint, their resources have not been focused on technology. It's been much more around assets. It's been around, consolidating back office side of things. It's about building their fleet, adding to their sales team. So I think our technology paired with all of their capacity will make for something very interesting over the next couple of years in terms of being able to get access to all of that cap across all of their different business units across 3 different countries. So they've got all the companies that they own in Canada. They've got CFI and Transport America, a few other companies in the U.S., and then they've got CFI Logistica in Mexico. CFI Logistica has one of the most intricate LTL networks in Mexico when it comes to like that type of market in Mexico that is not very advanced. But CFI Logistica is far in advance, further down the path than a lot of other companies are. So I'm excited to partner with them and continue to work with them. They've been really supportive so far of everything that we've asked for. Came and spoke to our team pretty early on and talked about, going back to our earlier conversation, what is a trucking company like about a broker or not like, and how do you work better with them? So we've been able to leverage the relationship significantly over the last year essentially, or 9 months, but at the same time, we're not required to only use their capacity or to only put CFI in a lane. We'll give them an opportunity, but we're fair to everybody, and so we want every carrier in our network and want to be able to support kind of the growing ecosystem. I love
the TFI as a business. In fact, 2 of the companies that they own, our American audience may not know who Transforce is or TFI is, but they own CFI and they own Transport America. When I was younger, and so a lot of kids grow up and they sort of follow sports teams. I didn't. I followed trucking companies. It was my jam. And so as a kid, my favorite companies were CFI and Transport America that was not family. And you
really liked Mexico.
I was just enamored. Transport America had a much higher rate per mile. It was a public company, so the financials are there. And I always was sort of enamored with this idea that they were doing a lot of specialized temperature controlled stuff. I thought it was really cool. Again, I am a trucking nerd, not following sports teams. As my older brother did that. So he only recently became a trucking nerd.
We should start a fantasy trucking league.
Trucking league, yes. That may be coming. We'll see.
My other 3 fantasy football leagues want to fire me right now. So
okay. But do you think you would get fired from the trucking league?
No.
Okay. Well,
I mean, I don't know.
Who would be on the trucking league? Who would make it? Who would you pick?
I mean, knowing how competitive my siblings and I can be, obviously Andrew should be in that. You're welcome to join. You can be the commissioner. You can be the commissioner.
Okay.
There's
who would you pick? Like if you had to pick carriers.
Oh, carriers to be traded and everything?
Well, yeah. Like these are if they're the players, who do you pick?
I'd be going heavily towards the guys in Laredo and El Paso.
Okay. Any favorites that you want to give a shout out to?
M&J, Tomb.
Okay.
Alanis, the reefer carrier down in Laredo, has been really helpful and supportive. Big fan of CFI, obviously, for several reasons.
I am as well. And I remember as a kid, they've sort of reverted when they were part of XPO but that Sprite spot, you know what I'm talking about, where they had the mud flaps or the rear flaps, and they had the little spot character. I thought that was so cool that they had taken this mainstream icon that had a long life. It was a couple of years of Sprites. It was 7-Up. Was it 7-Up?
I don't remember.
7-Up that had the spot because it was right. Is that right? 7-Up or Sprite? One of the lemon drinks had the spot.
Mountain Dew.
No, it was either 7-Up or Sprite, and it was the little spot. And CFI used it on the back of their trailers as a reminder not to get into the blind spot. I don't know. I thought that was cool. It was sort of blending mainstream consumerism with trucking.
There's a lot of. It's the biggest billboard that you could possibly get access to is the side of a trailer that's going everywhere. It's driving all around.
Yep, absolutely. So what is next for you guys? In terms of where you're headed, is the goal to continue to raise venture capital and scale it? Where does this end up for you guys? So
we've been hearing from VCs on the coast since the day that we made our announcement with you guys, essentially, and we're continuing to build technology, and obviously that requires a lot of resources. We want to grow really expansive tech. We're not going to try to build a TMS and sell it to brokers or anything like that. That's not our focus. We're not trying to sell software to carriers or anything like that. We're trying to build a platform that does automation within everything, and so the more we can build into that system, the more modules we can create that can drive either better efficiencies internally or create efficiencies for our customers and help our carriers get better access to capacity. We need to keep pouring resources into that. So I would imagine we would start talking about a Series A in the coming months. We've already been hearing about it from a lot of other people and pushing us to start that conversation. So it really depends. With this kind of thing, it's a numbers game. So the more fuel you can pour on the fire, the faster things will go. And it's the mythical man month. Have you read that book or heard of that? No. It's the concept of the fact that just because you throw another developer at something doesn't mean that it's going to grow. It's not going to be built faster.
Right, exactly.
I know that won't happen, but I do know that if we can start to build up 2 or 3 or 4 more development teams and stand them up to each focus on a core product, that will ultimately build better and stronger. And I also know that we need to build resources around it, and we're not going to try to throw 2,000 people into an office in Chicago and try to make that our big digital freight brokerage like somebody else might be doing right now. I think where the resources need to go are definitely on the technology. We want to continue to hire phenomenally smart people. A lot of the people that work for us, everybody that works for us are really smart. They all provide a lot of value. So you're not going to see us pulling a bunch of kids out of a Big Ten school that played a sport of some sort. We're going to find the nerds that really love to find the really intricate parts of the data that they can turn into something more useful.
Really important question. Chattanooga or Chicago as the freight headquarters? Make your case.
Chicago, hands down. Look at what was born out of Chicago.
Make your case.
Coyote Command, American Backhaulers is what started it all, and that became Chicago Central for C.H. Robinson. You have so many other brokerages in Chicago. It's certainly getting crowded from a standpoint of hiring technical development people or development talent, rather. But in terms of the logistics center of the world, we're in Central Time. So it's only 2 hours earlier in California. It's only an hour later on the East Coast. I think it's in the right spot from a kind of a weather standpoint. Flights also, I'm surprised that there's a direct flight from Chicago to Chattanooga.
Oh, God.
But there isn't yet to Laredo. Fair. It's driving me crazy. So United, if you're listening, please get me a direct flight to... No.
Okay.
There's direct to San Antonio, but that's a 3-hour drive. Or you go through Houston.
Dallas has got you beat there.
Yeah, so you have to fly through Dallas or Houston, depending on who you're flying with. But
got it. Well, I'm going to counter your case to Chicago. On a per capita basis, Chattanooga blows Chicago away. You guys have, 8 million people live in Chicago?
Probably, it sounds about
We have
right.
170,000, and there's a lot more freight per capita here. Plus, it's a destination job. I'm not saying it's not in Chicago, but certainly here it is a destination job. So two rival cities. I think we should have a contest between Chicago freight brokers. I'm calling you out. Chicago, Chattanooga is kicking your ass. So let's do that.
There's the fantasy league. It's the
Chicago versus Chat.
I can tell you our plan is next year at some point would be to open an office here, for sure. We want to expand. In terms of talent that I've worked with over the last decade plus, the best salespeople I've ever come across were the people that were based in Chattanooga.
I think, in credit to Ted, I mean, if you look at all the businesses that they've had success with, they've had a number of investments. Many of them have done exceptionally well. Some of them have not. But the big difference, and somebody described this to me, the biggest difference between the ones that have done really, really well have been companies that rely on sales cultures. So Reliance Insurance, Bellhops, obviously Access America. Those were sales-centric culture. And I think Ted, Chad, Ronald, those guys understood the importance of culture far sooner than anyone else in this community did. And that has reverberated even in my own lessons. I didn't grow up. That wasn't a topic really of importance in an asset-based trucking family. That was something I learned by watching their successes here.
Yeah, and this isn't to counter the Chicago versus Chattanooga thing, but
we're gonna figure this out.
The logistics culture in Chicago that you see in every brokerage you walk into now, the high volume, the noise, the ringing, the constant chatter, there's a buzz to it that, first of all, when you walk a customer through a large brokerage floor, you get like the chills walking through it, and you hear that ringing and the sound and everything. So there's a lot of value in that, but I have to definitely credit my parents on the cultural piece long time ago. But I do think kind of that marriage that we saw between Chicago and Chattanooga with a big acquisition a few years ago, that made for a really unique, interesting culture. But at the end of the day, salespeople down here, just in the Southeast in general, have a certain grit and scrappiness to them that you can't teach.
It's harder. I mean, if you look at the competition in Chicago, there's a lot of other industries there that you can do quite well. Down here, these are destination jobs, and it's an important sector, which is why I think Chattanooga is winning or it could win the Chicago-Chattanooga. We've got to have a battle of this. We got to figure out which is the best freight city to do it. I challenge Chicago. You in?
Yeah, and I've got some friends in Detroit that would argue that
we need to do a debate at FreightWaves Live in Chicago, Chattanooga versus Chicago. Boom, we're gonna do it.
Let's do it
there
in our hometown.
Dude, it's hometown, but you're in my bit. We're hosting.
You guys put on the hands down the best event I've been to in the last year of going to all these conferences. It's the production quality is above and beyond everything else that I've seen, and that'll make it a very good venue, actually.
I love it. This is good, and I do appreciate that. And speaking
so, are
of
you going to moderate that, or are you going to be on the?
I think we got to have a fair, impartial judge, or otherwise, I will make the case for Chicago. Maybe Ted and I can be on one side, and a couple of the Chicago guys. We're going to figure this out. Logistics to come.
All right. So who's going to moderate that?
What's that?
Who's going to moderate that?
I don't know. We're going to find a neutral party that's not a Chicago or a Chattanoogan to actually be the new. Otherwise, you have this sort of. Yes, we're in Chicago, but it's FreightWaves Conference based out of Chattanooga. I love it. We're going to do it. Anyway, speaking of that, if you haven't got tickets to FreightWaves Live on November 12th and 13th, be sure to get them. The conference is going to be 300% attendance above the one we had in May. It is going to be electric, and I don't just mean the LEDs. Come get your tickets today at FreightWaves Live, and we will see you on November 12th and 13th. Matt will be there along with over 1,500 folks.